Bands. I'm your host, Olivia Ladd, a music journalist in Nashville, Tennessee. The premise of this podcast is I find a friend, musician, or other journalist in the Nashville music scene, and we discuss the history, discography, art, and influences surrounding our favorite cult bands. Bandsplainer is part of the We Own This Town network of podcasts based in Nashville. You can find more information at weownthistown.net. Bandsplainer is available for streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. To keep up with the latest, follow Bandsplainer on Twitter at Bandsplainer. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to Bandsplainer, the podcast where we explain bands. Today we are recording the season finale of season 1 of Bandsplainer, and we're doing a band that is extremely important to me personally, that I'm really excited to get into. Bikini Kill, the pioneering riot grrl band from the 90s, and our guest today is Beth Cameron from Cassettes and some other projects. So you can go ahead and introduce yourself, talk about what you do in Nashville and musically.
Okay. I'm Beth, and I used to have a band called Cassettes for about 10 years, and I have a new band called Black Bra, and that's what I do.
Nice. So I'm excited about this band for so many reasons. They were kind of like an introduction to feminism for me, and just a big band throughout my late teens, early 20s. So I'm really excited to kind of give them a spotlight, because I feel like they're very, very underrated, even though maybe like people in music journalism or, you know, self-proclaimed music nerds may know about them, or people who were around in the 90s, unlike me, probably know about them. But I just think they're really important to go in depth on, so I'm very excited to do that. So a short synopsis of Bikini Kill is that they formed in Olympia, Washington in 1990 and ran as a band until 1997, each kind of following projects that were an offset of Bikini Kill after that. And they are considered pioneers of the riot grrl movement, among a few other bands like Bratmobile and Heavens to Betsy, etc. So the original members that formed in 1990 are Kathleen Hanna, who was the front woman. And if you're not familiar with that name, you may be more familiar with Le Tigre or Julie Ruin, which are her other projects, which we'll talk a little bit about. And then Toby Vale was the drummer, Kathy Wilcox was the bassist, and Billy Karen was the guitarist. And probably seen in the news recently that Bikini Kill is doing a mini reunion tour in, I think, London, LA, and New York. And so they have a new guitarist, which is Erica Dawn Lyle, for those, which is also a great timely plug, the fact that they are reuniting for the first time since the 90s, which is really cool. So if you're totally unfamiliar with Bikini Kill, you've probably heard the song Rebel Girl, because it was on Guitar Hero 2. No. Yeah, which is how I discovered the band in youth group playing Guitar Hero.
That's how you discovered Bikini Kill?
Yeah, so pretty
youth group.
Yeah, playing Guitar Hero, and I was like, I really like the song Rebel Girl, like that's cool. And then I got into Bikini Kill through that.
Oh
which
my
is
gosh.
Pretty subversive, I guess.
What version of Rebel Girl was it?
I'm not positive.
Okay.
I guess
it must have been the like Joan Jett
it was
definitely
definitely the produced version, not the one that's on that first EP.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting thing. So we can kind of get into talking about just how they began forming, the beginning of their history, so you can jump in whenever. All 4 of these people were art students at Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. And Kathleen Hanna was a photography major who had just faced a lot of criticism for her like feminist ideals, you know, within college from professors or other people she was working with. So her and a few other women opened the Reco Muse Gallery in the late 80s and kind of just started passing out flyers and talking to other women at shows or at school about, like, we want to get groups together to start talking about punk rock and feminism and organizing. And that's kind of how a lot of the people within the riot grrl scene met each other, even outside the college. Yeah, and so they kind of all formed, like, I think it was Toby Vale and someone else were like, let's start a band. We don't know how to play instruments. Let's just do it. And they got Kathleen Hanna as the lead singer because they were like, she's such, like, an enigmatic, like, front person. We can just, like, feel it, and she was. They started playing shows, like, in before the band officially formed, I guess, in the very early 90s, and Kathleen Hanna kind of just wrote songs in her Toyota truck, she said. And the very beginnings of the band are tracked in Toby Vale's zine, which is Jigsaw. And fanzines and zines are a big kind of reoccurring thing we're going to talk about on this podcast, which we have in past episodes. But fanzines were kind of the foundation of riot grrl and how they spread information. And now it's cool that we have a documentation of all things happening in the, like, Pacific Northwest feminist punk scene at the time.
And I would even just interject and say that fanzines were important to the punk rock movement like, even way before riot grrl, right?
Yeah,
so they've been integral, like, in music for decades.
Yeah, because of that too, there's kind of a roadmap for how to utilize them to get your message across, so they kind of, like, did that with their own thing, which is cool. So in Jigsaw, there's, like, a short excerpt where Toby Vale is just kind of talking about, like the manifesto. They all, like, wrote their own manifestos for what they wanted this band to be. And so she's writing about, like, practicing with them. And she, this is an entry from October 21, 1990, I believe. And she was like, a feminist to me means trying to confront sexism and be powerful. I think I'm changing. I'm going to ask questions now instead of tell everybody everything. And her statement of intent for the band Bikini Kill is to provide support and guidance to the youth with modern punk rock sensibilities and to reclaim the domain of punk.
Isn't that amazing to have? They were so, like, forward thinking that they had a mission statement for their band.
Yeah. It's really cool.
It's really cool.
Yeah, they went about this with, I think, more so than trying to start a band musically. They went about this as, like, which I think Kathleen Hanna may have said in the documentary or another interview, where she was like, you know, I could, like, walk up to people and say, let's talk about feminism, or I could, like, yell it at them from a stage and they thought it was cool and, like, wanted to care about it.
Well, and Kathleen Hanna had a conversation with Kathy Acker, who was a feminist artist in the 80s, who told her, said, if you want to get your message of feminism across, you need to start a band. Like, that's what you should do. Don't try to be an artist. Go start a band.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And she did.
Yeah,
That's
she did.
pretty cool. This is also all happening around the time that kind of right before the third wave of feminism, which riot grrl was a huge part of. So in the early 90s, there was this, like, feminism was dead idea floating around, and especially on college campuses, as any woman who's been to college at any time can understand that when some kind of rhetoric like that is floating around, it's kind of hard to combat and hard to be around. So they kind of wanted to prove that wrong. Like, they were living feminism. They were trying to learn about feminism. How could it be dead? So that's kind of pretty cool. They all, like, wrote their own mission statement. They passed out in a zine so people knew and could hold them accountable and join in. So in 1991, they had been touring, playing a lot of, like, you know, basement shows around, especially the Pacific Northwest and Olympia. And they released their first EP in 1991 called Revolution Girl Style Now. And Toby Vale talked about this a little bit, and she said that, like, the reason it's so roughly done and they just released it how it was. It's like they wanted a girl to hear it and be like, I can go make music, and it kind of did that, which we can
and
talk
Ian
about.
MacKaye recorded it.
Oh, cool. I didn't know he recorded that one. I thought it was just the EP, the second one. That's cool.
No,
nice.
because
Nice.
the first Revolution Girl Still Now and Yeah EP, the split with Huggy Bear, became the first two records, right? And Ian MacKaye did the first half of it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so Ian MacKaye from Fugazi, which I guess we can take a second, and you might be able to speak more confidently on this than I can, but just kind of about the scene going on in the Pacific Northwest and in punk at this point in history in like the very early 90s, kind of the other bands going on.
Like the grunge movement?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was... I would say very male dominated. Grunge was, getting kickstarted at that point. Bands like Soundgarden, Nirvana, Mudhoney, and I know Kathleen Hanna has kind of cited a couple of, I don't know if they might have had women in them around that time, but as far as there being girl bands in Olympia, at that time there really weren't any, so Bikini Kill, Bratmobile, they were it. And at that point in punk, a big thing, which you kind of get the idea of with the mission statement, all that, is that they wanted to reclaim these spaces, which they did. So they were kind of the only like bands with women in them or fronted by women at the time, and I guess we might go into that a little bit later, but yeah, it was like making a physical space for women was kind of a big deal at the time. So the next year they did the Bikini Kill EP, which is also part of that. You've probably heard the first two records or heard of Bikini Kill, and this is the first part, which was also produced by Ian MacKaye of Fugazi. And it was released on Kill Rock Stars, which is a pretty cool label that I guess it's still around, but that when it was around at that time, based in Portland and Olympia, it was kind of like all the stuff I listened to in college 20 years later, which is like Elliott Smith and Bratmobile and Bikini Kill and some early Nirvana stuff. So they were very much in this kind of scene of music, and it's kind of interesting to see how they evolved kind of next to all of those bands. So as far as the Bikini Kill EP, man, it's a really great record. In Spin in 2012, Jessica Hopper, who is one of my favorite music journalists, she said there's punk before this album and after. And I really believe that. I think it's a really underrated record. I mean, just the opening line that Kathleen Hanna says, it is immediately... It catches you. It catches your gut, So, I mean, it's like from that, like, bullet that comes out of her mouth, it doesn't stop for the entire record. And then in the past few days, I've, like, listened to all three records back to back, and there is a feeling that they captured on that, the CD release of the first two records. There's a feeling that they captured with those recordings that they were never able to recapture again. Anyway, yeah, it's just magic,
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think this is also before they really get into, bigger touring and all this stuff, this is a point where there's still this newer band, and I think it was surprising to people at the time when it came out that it was like Kathleen Hanna specifically being a woman that was so like aggressive during shows and on these recordings, and like you can really feel that when you listen to it. And we were talking a second before we hit record on this, but about how just the first time you heard like this record or Bikini Kill, I know when I got really into Bikini Kill, and so I was kind of getting my toes in the water with feminism, and I had just kind of discovered the whole idea as I grew up in like a very conservative southern place. That wasn't something anyone had ever talked about. I hadn't like heard the word really, until I was a teen. And then when I heard Bikini Kill, it was just like validation. When I heard the songs, I think specifically the first part of this record, probably, I was like, wow, like I've felt all these things, and I've felt this angry, and people have like told me it wasn't okay to be angry, and then I'm hearing this, and it's like so refreshing. It's like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, I think I was in the 8th grade when I heard Bikini Kill for the first time. My best friend lived in a more like progressive household, so she had like Spin and Rolling Stone and access to things like that I didn't. And so she heard a Bikini Kill, brought like her Walkman to health class one day, and I heard it, and I was hooked from the second I heard it. Hooked. I was like, oh, I have to do that. That's what I'm going to do. Yeah, I think Kathleen Hanna has, for me, she has three different voices. She's got this guttural voice that she uses, this that's like masculine, very low tones, and then she has the scream, and then she has her baby voice.
Yeah.
This like seductress. It was so interesting, and yet it's so melodic, the way that she sings.
Yeah, and that is cool about it. It's like, even like her like screaming or whatever, I was like, I kind of punk was the only scene that was around when I was a teenager, when most girls discover Bikini Kill or whatever, and so all I had to compare that to was like screamo or whatever, and I'm like, wow, like she does make this like anger and this like literal like yelling, like using like the muscles in her throat to yell, whatever, like melodic, and it's like I want to listen to it. So it is pretty interesting. Her as a front woman is just really just admirable, like all the interesting things she was doing.
And and at that time, so when I was in the 8th grade, it was probably about 93, 94, and everything that was on the radio, there were not women that were playing this type of music. It blew my mind. I couldn't believe that I was hearing a woman sing these things, sound that way, that the band was made up predominantly of women. Toby Vale cannot be undercut as a great drummer. She is a great drummer. She really, like, if they had not have had such a great solid drummer as Toby Vale, I don't know that Bikini Kill would have been as powerful as it was.
I totally agree with that.
She's an amazing drummer. So nice, powerful stuff.
Yeah. After they released that, it's the next year, and they have this relationship going with Ian MacKaye, who's based in DC, which is more of hardcore as opposed to grunge or generalized punk, I guess. So all of the people in Bikini Kill moved to DC for the summer of 1993, and they lived, or I don't know if they lived there, so they practiced and recorded in this punk house called the Embassy, which apparently now is like a Starbucks.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, that's capitalism for you.
Yeah. And so they moved to DC for the summer, and it's kind of interesting here because they do bridge that like West Coast grunge punk sound that they are making their own version of with like the East Coast hardcore, and they record Pussy Whipped, which is their I guess first real album, but once again on the first 2 records CD that's also on there, and Ian MacKaye worked with them on that one. And it's kind of interesting because in the documentary, The Punk Singer, which is about Kathleen Hanna, she talked about this time briefly. And I don't know that they all had a great time in DC, but she was talking about how there was this kind of like power to the music happening around them because they were so close to the seat of power, and how that affected her and made her even more of like an outwards like performer because of that. And when they were there that summer, they opened for Fugazi at a show in the National Mall. She's singing songs like Suck My Left One, and like saying just these like phrases that to the outward people watching it seemed like crude or whatever, but it's like she was trying to get their attention. She was trying to upset them by saying these things because she had been told crude things her whole life, and, as all women have. And so they got a really bad review in, I guess, the Washington Post. And she just started like a call for all Riot Girls to have a media blackout after that, which is so powerful. To me, like, when I learned about that, it sent the message, like, if you don't like the way people are receiving you, like, quit giving them any information, like,
right, how
really
smart
cool.
that was.
Yeah.
But I think we're missing something here that we need to talk about real quick on how quickly the trajectory of Bikini Kill rose to, like, the fame
during this time. Exactly,
Courtney Love, Hole, Sonic Youth, like all of those bands, as the grunge movement was, rapidly growing and becoming famous, then all eyes Kathleen, this is the thing about feminism, right? Kathleen Hanna was a powerful, attractive white woman, and the media just loves to, slap a pretty face on a movement, right?
Yeah.
And so she recognized what was happening. She recognized that the media, well, I won't say just she, but the band, everyone involved with Riot Grrl was, they were understanding, like, what was happening to this movement because of the media. And so they called for a media blackout.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot going on during that time. So they were friends with people like Kurt Cobain, who was sort of an ally or whatever, but they also were catching flack from, like, Thurston Moore and Sonic Youth, and they wrote a song because they weren't only getting negative press from the press or from people heckling them at shows. It was like other bands didn't like what they were doing because they didn't play their instruments as well, or they thought their message wasn't necessary. And Thurston Moore wrote, like, a bad review of their band, and they just turned it into a song. Basically, they wrote a song that was very simple, stripped down, and then they had
it was like spoken word.
Yeah, they had spoken word, which I can't remember her name from Bratmobile.
Allison.
Not Allison, the other one. Oh, man.
Oh, no. Molly.
Yes. Molly from Bratmobile read his review about Bikini Kill over their live show, and that was even more, once again, than
was that
being,
Molly that was doing? Oh, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that until recently. So that was even more so them being like, we don't care what you think, and we're gonna play our music. And, like, that's kind of the point. If it makes you mad, like, you probably need to be, like, listening to what we're telling you. And so, you can look back at these lyrics, and, like we spoke about a second earlier, it is very feminism 101. And, like, 20 years later, like, there's a lot more to discuss there, or that should be considered there, that I could go on and on about. But, like, as a teen girl discovering that, and I'm sure for people listening to it at the time that hadn't heard these very basic things, it really held power and really, like, affected people. Which is also part of their fame, like, they felt like when they got to DC, people finally got their message a little bit. So after this time, they toured with the British Riot Grrl band Huggy Bear in London, and they did a split album, which is Our Troubled Youth and Yeah Yeah Yeah. And there's actually a documentary done about it, which I haven't seen, but it's called It Changed My Life, Bikini Kill in the UK. Have you seen it?
I've seen clips, but I've not been able to track it down.
Yeah, it's hard to find.
Big Huggy Bear fan. Nice. Loved Huggy Bear.
Nice. So yeah, after that, they are getting much more famous, and, like, they stand out beyond, the other bands in the grunge scene or whatever. And Joan Jett from the Runaways, like, catches on to what they're doing and wants to produce 2 songs for them. And she did Rebel Girl and New Radio, which were previous released on other things, but she did, like, a really well produced version, which is probably, if you've heard any of their songs, it's probably these. So that's pretty cool. And in the documentary, Joan Jett talks quite a bit about, like, Kathleen Hanna's influence and things like that.
And then I don't know if you've seen Joan Jett's recent documentary about her life.
I haven't yet,
but it's very good. And Kathleen Hanna is in it.
Nice.
And
Perfect.
There's, a little segment in there that they talk about when Kathleen and Joan Jett hooked up, and it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild stuff, man. Joan Jett, what a lady.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy.
Yes.
So after that, they only put out one other like record, which was in 1996 before they broke up, which was Reject All American. And then after that, the singles was released, which was basically all the songs and singles re-recorded, you know, whatever that they hadn't released came out. And since then, there have been reissues, actually very recently, reissues of things. So that's really it for the discography part. But so as far as the singles, I'll talk about that for a second. So I think also a lot of people that maybe got into Bikini Kill years later, like myself, when I was at the right age to kind of receive this message and get into music, you know, the singles and stuff is what was available, is what was being reissued at that time. And a cool thing that Jen Pelly said in Pitchfork about this record was, if a person in your life wants or needs Bikini Kill, wants or needs proof that punk can seek justice and thrills at once, that feminist rock and roll can be palatable without being formulaic, that protest music can be unflappably cool, give them the singles first. Which I think is interesting. It's a really good way to get into the band.
I've never listened to it.
Really?
Mm-mm. Wow. I don't know, like a diehard, I guess.
Yeah.
Just those 3 records it's like I can't go beyond that.
for sure. I feel that. But they are pretty interesting. So I kind of want to talk for a minute just about the way they carved out a space in music for women, particularly the live setting. So there was this kind of catchphrase at their shows that was "girls to the front," which has been repurposed for many things in the past years. But for them, it was, like we were talking about earlier, there were mostly male-fronted bands and male music fans, and this was them, like, trying to physically reclaim space at their shows from violence against women. So sometimes they would chant "girls to the front," and sometimes, like, Kathleen Hanna would, like, dive into the crowd to, like, protect women fans. She talks about kind of an irony of their shows, which kind of towards the end of their breakup kind of became an exhaustive thing for all of them, because they had a lot of people, you know, on the front rows, these women that were like relating to the lyrics and singing them back, and then like in the back of the shows, these men like throwing beer bottles at them, and like who only showed up to the show to like be angry and like ruin the whole thing. But they did make a lasting impact, I believe, in like girls having a space, because Kathleen Hanna now, I saw her live in 2016, I believe, at Wrecking Ball Fest with the Julie Ruin, her latest project. And she was talking about how, like, she's like, I don't say "girls to the front" anymore because you're already at the front. Like, we don't necessarily need that. Let's move on to the next thing.
Right.
But it's cool because at the time, that was a thing, I guess.
I mean, that's what we were talking about before. I mean, how, you know, third wave was just taking off, you know, during the early 90s, and so it was kind of a watered down version of feminism. I mean, it was just the foundational aspects of feminism, because you have to start with the basics, and then you can move on to the complexities. And so, yes, and she's exactly right. It's like their feminism is very complex, and so yes, but you have to start somewhere, and that's what Bikini Kill did. They gave you the foundation of feminism.
Yeah, I think yeah, specifically for a lot of people in music too.
Yeah.
It was in this palatable way of delivery that, like, you know, you can sit and read books or watch documentaries, but then when you like feel an emotionally charged song and you're listening to it, even like for me a decade or two later, like it's a different form of delivery that goes a bit deeper, I think, of like the basics that you need to know to get elsewhere.
And that was the thing, like for me, Bikini Kill was a stepping stone, because through Bikini Kill I found out about feminist writers and feminist poets, and then that propelled me into a world of feminism that I never, and it was literally because of Bikini Kill that I found any feminist writer. That's a hard thing to do, you know? I mean, that movement was so important, and Bikini Kill had to happen, you know? Like, we needed Bikini Kill to happen. It had to happen.
Yeah.
So
that's actually I mean, I totally agree with that. I feel like I like even though it wasn't at the time it was happening, like Bikini Kill was so essential to where I knew the basics of feminism, of like Gloria Steinem or whatever, but when I got into Bikini Kill, I found everything that came after that, and like everything from like cyborg theory to like female music journalist and stuff, and that like, I mean, that changed my life. Like, I like found this side of feminism that was like what I wanted to be thinking about and like diving into, and it kind of changed my view of things and what I could do and who I could be.
Well, because of a third wave, you started having women's studies majors at colleges.
Yeah.
I have so many friends that majored in women's studies and feminism in college, you know. And, you know, now they're social workers, and yeah, it's important.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, someone said that in the documentary, they were talking about like Bikini Kill really did have to happen for all these other things to happen. And it was like, she said it had to happen or else we all would have starved to death culturally.
Yeah.
And I just love that quote so much.
Tammy Ray Carlin said that. Yeah.
Which I don't know, I think it's true because I don't know, for me it was like going back to like when I discovered them, and I think especially in college when I really took it to heart and got into them, is like I was just surrounded by like men were all in bands, and like I was told like I don't know, I was almost afraid to share my thoughts on that or whatever, and I never found an artist quite like Kathleen Hanna that inspired me to like share my own things as a woman. I had like written journalistic articles, but I had never when I was, I guess, a sophomore in college, I had never like shown anyone my poetry or my art or any of that I had been like, or songs I had written in my room for like 10 years. And when I got really into Bikini Kill, like I guess my second wave getting into them, when I really understood it and soaked it all in, it inspired me for the first time ever to like make zines, and I started like making zines about my like dissatisfaction, and I like started a band in college where it was like kind of like Riot Grrl style, because I really like I would say Patti Smith is a close second, but like I'd never been so inspired to be like, wow, like I can do that even if I don't think I'm great at it. Like
popular music, yeah, was so aggro. There had to be an antithesis to that. And I mean, I was the same way. Like, I mean, you know, when I found Bikini Kill, you know, there was also Hole there. I mean, you know, Hole was probably the most, you know, popular female fronted, you know, band at the time, and like in mainstream radio and music. But that still seemed unattainable. It was like, well, you can't beat Courtney Love. Yeah. You know, but you heard Bikini Kill and you were like, I could do that. Yeah. And I locked myself in my room and I taught myself to play Bikini Kill songs, and then started a band, and the first songs I ever played on a stage in front of people were Bikini Kill songs.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
at my cool. You know, backwoods high school in, you know, Franklin, Tennessee, and like near farms, and I stood up there and sang songs like Liar and Double Dare Ya. I can't believe I didn't get suspended.
That's really great, though. I think, like, that's the story I've heard from a lot of people, though, is that whether musically or, like, in other ways, like, you hear a band like this and it's just, like, the first time you've heard something and you're just inspired. Like, you, like, have to do something. And I don't know. It's just, like, inspiring in all these, like, small ways that are really important at the end of the day.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess we can talk about maybe some, like, specific songs, if you'd want to go into that. Yeah.
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah. Should we just kind of go album by album, you think?
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
Well, I feel like we have to talk about Double Dare Ya.
Oh, yeah.
Just because that's
important.
We have to talk about Double Dare Ya. We're Bikini Kill, and we want revolution, girl style now. I mean, that it's
just like gave me goosebumps. I think like the first time I heard it, like I just like revolution girl style now. Like, let's do it our way. Like, we're tired of waiting around.
It's legendary.
Yeah,
that line is legendary.
It's iconic.
Yes.
I think this song is kind of throwing everyone's criticism back in their face, because the verses are like talking about like things men have told them. You get so emotional, like don't talk out of line.
I heard Kathleen Hanna talk about the way she wrote in Bikini Kill. I think she summed it up very well, where she says that she was writing songs to men and she was allowing women to witness her singing these songs to men.
Yeah, to like this theoretical male
patriarchy.
Or whatever. Yeah, the patriarchy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's kind of what that is a good premise to like speak about before we go into songs. Because that's kind of what this is. And then like in the chorus, she's like, I double dare you to like do what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Like quit listening to this. And like as basic as that seems in 2019, like that was a big deal. Like she's like, I double dare you to like, you know, cry out loud and like have emotions and do what you want to do. And to have that as like the first song on that record, which is now the first 2 records CD, man, it's just like right off the bat, like getting into like, let's like talk about this. Like, let's get into it. It's a really powerful song, I think.
I mean, hearing her say rights, you do have rights. When I heard that, I was like, I have rights.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I don't have to do everything that my father tells me to do.
Yeah.
I don't have to conform to this way of being a woman.
Yeah. I think so. I think that's a good song of like the anger being channeled, and there's no, you know, it's just like women, I don't know, growing up like in the South or whatever, you're not supposed to be angry. And like I literally like, you know, like people had like told me that like, oh, you're like an angry feminist or whatever, and then I like find this and I'm like, oh my god, like I'm allowed to be angry and I'm allowed to cry and I don't have to do this, I don't have to do that, and I have my own rights, and like whatever, like it's like so affirming.
Mm-hmm.
It's really cool.
She has a line in this song, "You get so emotional, baby," which I'm pretty sure I just heard that the other day. Like somebody just said that to me again the other day.
Yeah.
It is something a woman will carry with her entire life, and emotions will always try to be beat out of women. And it's and the members of Bikini Kill were so young. They were in their early 20s and they were dealing with these, you know, very big theoretical, philosophical, you know, ideologies, and singing about them and writing about them in a way that translated to, you know, very layman, you know, terms.
Yeah. And I think that's just so important. Like everyone needs that,
right?
You know.
Well, it's a mark of a good writer,
yeah,
right?
True. Like, we've kind of talked about that before too with like pop music. Like, I think a good mark of pop music is just understandable lyrics that are still like relatable, that pack a punch. And like, she's kind of a good example of that. Maybe not in the pop sense, but just as a songwriter, that she can take these giant ideas that like, especially at the time, a lot of people were trying to figure out what they meant, and like at least put it into a way that like for the moment or for the people listening to it makes sense. It's really powerful.
Do you want to talk about Feels Blind, or should we not go there yet?
I think we should do
okay.
Feels Blind. So Feels Blind is I think a lot of people's one of their favorite Bikini Kill songs, and I know for me this was a huge one for me that made me really realize the impact of Bikini Kill. And I want to pull up the lyrics to discuss this one.
I want to just say, because I think my favorite Bikini Kill lyrics are in the songs, especially for me as a 13-year-old hearing this for the first time. And they are, as a woman, I was taught to always be hungry. Yeah, women are well acquainted with thirst. Well, I could eat just about anything, and we might even eat your hate up like love.
Oh, yeah.
That's poetry.
It is. That like that's what
that makes me get teary. I mean,
same. It's like emotional. I think those are probably some of my favorite Bikini Kill lyrics too. And that's like when I made my first zine. It was called Hungry, like based on that line.
Really.
And because that's a theme people are still singing about. Like Mitski has lyrics about that, and Bratmobile and Patti Smith and Sleater Kinney. Like Hunger Makes Me a Modern Girl by Carrie Brownstein. And it's like, man, like I do feel that hunger, like whatever. And I think this especially is kind of poetry. And so I have Hunger Makes Me a Modern Girl right here by Carrie Brownstein. And so she talked about hearing the song feels blind for the first time, and how like she talks later about how she was really glad Bikini Kill kind of came first before Sleater-Kinney, so she like had someone to look up to, and then they could go from there. Whatever, they kind of did the hard work of being a woman band, and not that Sleater-Kinney didn't, because they did a lot of great stuff, but so here's like the excerpt from the book is she says, "I remember being deeply struck by the lyrics, 'Look what you have taught me, your world has taught me nothing,' and then the lyrics you just said." And she said, "To me, that perfectly summed up being a young girl. It was the first time someone put into words my sense of alienation, the feeling that all these institutions and stories we've been taught to hold as sacred often had very little to do with my own lived experiences." And yeah, that's like exactly how I felt. I know.
And I also want to say, because I think this is a theme in many Bikini Kill songs, "We might even eat your hate up like love," the non-violence.
Yeah.
That
it was aggressive but non-violence. It was like we're going to do this the right way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're doing this out of love.
Yeah, and it's just, I like encourage you to look up the lyrics because it's beautiful and listen to this song, but I just remember like, I mean, I think I cried when I first heard the song, so it's like when she's like, "How does it feel? It feels fucking blind." And it's like, I just related to that. I was like, oh my God, like, yeah, I feel like I've been walking around blind because like I'm sitting here and I'm supposed to relate to all of these like male artists, and like, and especially in college for me, like this music scene that's like all dudes all the time, and like I'm alienated if I don't participate in that, and like maybe I don't relate to the Beatles and Radiohead as much, and then like to have an artist that like says that and then I can relate to her. Wow, crazy. But this is just like a perfect song.
I mean, the first verse of this song is just
really beautiful.
You could write a thesis on this first verse.
Yeah.
I don't think she ever wrote anything more poetic than this first verse.
I think
it's
this
like,
is
where did that come from?
I know.
Were you on drugs when you wrote this?
Yeah,
like,
I don't know. Because it's so different than her other stuff, but not that any of it is less good or less highbrow or whatever, but it really is just so... just the metaphor there. "All the doves that fly past my eyes have a stickiness to their wings. In the doorway of my eyes, I stand encased in the whisper you taught me."
Yeah.
And like, wow, like I remember hearing that and being like, that's what like being a woman in the South or just a woman in general has felt like. Like I've just been fed all of this stuff my whole life, and I'm like still hungry for something I don't know what it is. And I feel like, yeah, like all these doves, like there's a stickiness there. Like I can't get as high as I want. I can't, you know, get where I want to be. Oh man, it's a beautiful, beautiful song.
It's good.
It's still a pick me up for sure. And also the lyric, "If you were blind and there was no braille, there are no boundaries on what I can feel." Like,
yeah. Yes.
So great.
Kathleen Hanna.
I know, she's amazing. Yeah, so we can go on to some others from there, but that song is so important. Like if Bikini Kill did anything, like just them writing that song, I think affected Carrie Brown's scene, affected us. I know, you know, a lot of women I've talked to that are like into Bikini Kill, that's like something they mention.
Maybe the greatest feminist song of all time.
Yeah, I think
definitely in the running, top 5.
Yeah, in Pitchfork's, it was like the story of feminist punk in 33 songs, which is a great article.
It is so great.
They put it out a lot.
I just have that bookmarked, and I just refer back to it. Yeah.
They put it out a lot, like on social and stuff, because I think it's been popular since it came out in 2017. But they put that song on there. They kind of put like a song from, I guess, each year up until the 90s or something like that, or through the 90s, and that "Feels Blind" was the Bikini Kill song on there, and I was like, perfect. Like that's like a great feminist song of, man, it's just so important.
Yeah.
Think of
definitely
other
one
ones.
of the greatest. Yeah,
I think so. Talked about Thurston Hart's The Who, which is pretty cool.
White Boy was a big one for me too.
Yeah,
just because I think they also, Bikini Kill was really good at tongue in cheek. And White Boy is a little tongue in cheek to me. Just white boy, don't laugh, don't cry, just die. That was like my anthem when I was in beginning, middle school, and junior high and high school. Used it all the time. Wrote it on walls everywhere. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, White Boy, my favorite line from White Boy is, "I'm so sorry if I'm alienating some of you. Your whole fucking culture alienates me." And she says that from the stage at these white boys that she's like in college with or in the music scene with, and like that line like is always as tongue-in-cheek as it all is, like that stuck with me, like, you know, because I think every woman who's a teenager or college age, like you try to talk about your feelings or feminism or whatever, and maybe the people around you are like, oh, I don't want to hear about that, I can't relate to that. Or I remember showing friends Bikini Kill and them being like, well, I don't get it, and it's like, well, that's because it's not made for you for once, like everything you do seems to alienate me, so like let me have this. You know, that it's a great line.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
a
I
great
mean
song.
remembering and Riot Grrl there was such a division because, you know, my male friends or, you know, like my boyfriend at the time or whatever couldn't stand it, you know, couldn't stand her, you know, the voices of these Riot Grrl bands, the lyrics, and yeah, it wasn't made for them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But it was hard as like a young woman to reconcile that too.
Yeah, I think so, because you want it to be like, I want you to get it. I want you to get it in this medium. And like, maybe they won't, because it wasn't made for them. It was her like talking to this theoretical white male, and it was for women to like relish their own anger in and relate to. And yeah, I remember that in college when I was getting into them, and like had a radio show called Curb Stomp Radio where I played all this kind of stuff, and like my guy friends just being like, well, I don't like female voices or whatever, and then I was like, maybe I should hang out with these people. Like, you obviously have to like female air quote female voices, because it's like over half of music. Like, I don't know, that's a lame excuse.
Boy, we could just talk about that all day.
We could do a whole podcast on that.
The female voice.
Yeah, that's a bad excuse. I really like Don't Need You. I think that's one of the, I mean, a lot of them are angry. That's one of the angrier ones, where she really gets into like, I physically don't need you, talking to a man. Like, she doesn't need you for sex or your opinion or whatever. And on stage she would make like, you know, expletive motions singing that song, and it made people so mad, I think. It's a really good song, though.
Yeah, I also want to say that Bikini Kill was also kind of an introduction to sex for me, too.
Oh, that's an interesting view on it,
because she was talking about a lot of sexual acts that, you know, as, you know, 13, 14-year-old, you're getting teased about a lot. You know, at school, you know, boys are, like, calling you all kinds of names and, you know, telling you, you know, whatever. Just, you know, being vulgar and crass, and to hear her sing about sex, it really did teach me a lot about sex. Yeah,
that's cool. I mean, I think that's a cool way to learn about it, because she did talk about like the lack of female pleasure or like sexual abuse and sexual assault. So I mean, that's pretty interesting. I feel like I definitely came into it later, but wow, that's cool. That's kind of an empowering view to learn about sex from, as opposed to the traditional
and to not feel ashamed of not wanting to do those acts as a young girl, or feeling feeling sexual feelings and not, you know, being ashamed of them. Yeah,
sexuality in general is a cool kind of theme with Bikini Kill, because it's like she would play shows in like nothing but like a bra that she had thrifted or something, and so it's like Kathleen Hanna was like in a way a sexual icon, because she was like an attractive person, and you know, made these like movements on stage or whatever, but that wasn't the point. She was also empowering, and also in the way that like you can be, like, for me it was like, I can wear pink Doc Martens and my like glitter every day and still be angry and still have all these feelings. I don't have to like be a typical punk rocker. I don't have to look like that to feel that way. And that was a big thing for me too, discovering her. I was like, oh, I can be like girly and I can still be really mad.
Oh, there can be many layers.
Like
there's a duality to being a woman.
I don't have to be traditionally feminine. I can like do whatever I want, and that's a cool thing about Kathleen Hanna. She like used her sexuality to give this message while also giving another message of duality, which was a thing that's hard to grasp as a young girl, and you're told otherwise.
I remember when I learned that she was a stripper, you know, to put herself through college. And I was like, oh my God, Kathleen Hanna was a stripper? Wait, no, this can't be. And I was like angry about it. And, but then I realized, well, women can use their bodies in whatever way they want to use their bodies.
Yeah, which is a lyric. I don't know. I can't remember what song, but she's like, I can sell my body if I want to, you know. But yeah,
Jigsaw
that's
Youth, I think.
Yeah, that's a cool thing too, because I remember finding out about that, and luckily, you know, now in I guess fourth wave feminism, like sex worker rights are like a huge thing that we're talking about as a culture, and me kind of being introduced to that idea, as I think a lot of people were very recently, past 5-10 years, and being like, okay, well, Kathleen Hanna was a stripper, and that doesn't make her a bad person, and it doesn't make her not a feminist. Like, it just means she was like doing what she wanted with her body, and like, we already live under capitalism. Why not? Like,
she had to do what she had to do.
Exactly. So that was a cool kind of a cool like thing to helped me reconcile with like, okay, this is an idea I want to back, and like, I do believe in that, or whatever. Yeah. I busted in your Chevy window, which is maybe more spoken word.
What is that?
It's on the first two records. I busted in your Chevy window. Yeah. So it's kind of like an interlude spoken word thing, but I like that because she talks about like, I couldn't hurt your weapon, which was your mouth, but I could break your car window. She's talking about like a cat collar. She's like, I can break your car window so you're not protected from the world. Like, I can't hurt you. I'm not going to be violent, but like, I can like hurt what you own. I can hurt your material possessions and take away your power through that. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And that's like, when I saw her with the Julie Ruin, she kind of had that same attitude. She told a story of like walking in New York like recently at the time, and how this guy was like, you know, doing things in front of her on the street, and then he called her a bitch for like telling him to stop, and she's like, I am a bitch, everybody say it, I am a bitch. And I was like, okay, that's like the same thing. Like, that's like, she is not changed. Like, that attitude's still there, and that was cool to me, the like parallel between that song and like that like anecdote she told during the show.
Interesting.
Was pretty cool. Anyway,
I mean, Rebel Girl, I think, is, I don't know, we didn't really talk about it.
We should go into that one. I mean, that's probably their most popular song, because there is like the Joan Jett produced like version of it, which is just a really great song. That was the first Bikini Kill song I'd ever heard.
So does that mean, okay, so Rebel Girl shows up on the first two records. It shows up on Pussy Whipped, and then there is a Joan Jett produced version of Rebel Girl. There are 3 versions of Rebel Girl floating out there in the world that we know of. That's wild for punk rock.
That is, that
and
really
to
is.
like hear them side by side.
Yeah, that is interesting. You can kind of see the evolution of the band too, as they gain fame, and like, you know, they're starting out very rough cut of it to a Joan Jett produced version of it that's like considered a great rock song, like, and just in general, you know. But yeah, Rebel Girl is just a story about like a rebel girl. It's like a theoretical, like, you know, people call this girl a slut or a dyke, and she's like, no, like, she's my best friend, like, she's part of the revolution, like, we're all in this together kind of idea was spoken
girl
through this
love
song.
I mean, and especially, I mean, you know, when you're a young woman, your female friendships are everything.
Oh yeah.
You're in love with your friends. And Bikini Kill did a really good job of you know, singing about that love and how important female friendships are. And
I feel like I still feel that as a 23-year-old or whatever. Like, I don't know, I feel like I play, like, I'm definitely like a girl's girl, or however you would say it. Like, I definitely place those friendships with like the utmost importance, and it is a song about that. It's really cool. It's like, don't, you know, like, you know, come be my best friend, like, we're rebel girls. It's really cool, and it's cool that ended up being one of the more popular songs, because I think it's you know, it's not angry, it's not talking to like a man or whatever, so maybe like people can get into a Bikini Kill through the song because it's like a more like, you know, like a rock song, I guess, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Would you consider Bikini Kill to be a queer band?
I've kind of thought about this. I don't even know how to like answer,
because I feel like Rebel Girl in a sense is could certainly be interpreted as, you know, queer love, you know, but I definitely know people, I mean, as far as I know, they were all straight.
Yeah. Well, I guess they were all straight, but I think it also is I mean, there's so many great queer bands now that are like have the platform accessibility to be open about it, I think, and I think Bikini Kill at least helped in part in that. And then
Well, I mean, queer rights, women's rights,
yeah,
it was all
hand in
entangled.
hand, yeah.
So you couldn't,
Yeah, that's the thing, is that you can't separate queer rights and women's rights, and you can't separate, like, especially in something like punk rock, you can't separate that. And there were a lot of like queer people that looked up to Bratmobile, Bikini Kill, whatever. So I think I would maybe consider them like a kind of a queer band because of the just the subject matter at hand. I mean, that's like saying feminist band, you know, which now is kind of a different thing, but it's like inherently, if you're all feminist and you're in a band, you're technically a feminist band. And so I feel like it's kind of the same thing there. Yeah. I feel like queerness at least is discussed or validated through some of their songs.
You know, looking back on the Riot Grrl movement, though, and this was an issue that I took up with feminism as kind of I started to delve into it more. And looking back now, being older, looking back on the Riot Grrl movement, how whitewashed it was.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, you had to, you know, have some level of privilege to even have access to this movement and to this music. And I don't know that it was necessarily made for women of color. And so I think we have to just like recognize that.
As, for sure.
You know, when we're talking about this, as two white women that are talking about the Riot Grrl movement, that it was co-founded by white women, made for white women.
Yeah, and that's kind of why it disbanded towards the end, which almost in a good way, you know, that's like what Fourth Wave, I think, tackles a little better, even though we have so long to go, such a long way to go. But yeah, it was very like white women oriented, as the scene was white male oriented or whatever. So
as the first and second waves were as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like we talked about, like you have to have a starting point, but I think they did. I mean, I know Kathleen Hanna in interviews has like recognized that, and that is like one of the things is that even though it was inclusive to a new audience, there's still all of these people that weren't. And
absolutely.
I think part of that has to do with like, you know, they're playing a show in Portland or whatever, it's probably mostly white people showing up to a punk show or whatever, but it's like, you know, no one else would ever know about it if it's not made for them. Once again, you know, like it wasn't made for men, but it also wasn't made for these other people. So that is something to kind of think about. But I mean, I think it was a good starting point given that, but it is cool that now music is a lot more self-aware of that, even in punk scenes and local scenes.
I'm noticing that. I'm noticing that in like local punk scenes, that it's way more inclusive than it was when I started going to punk shows. And
yeah,
just
it's cool
recognizing
to see a change.
that.
Yeah, I mean, I even think from like college house shows to like going to like shows at Dark Matter now, it's very much more inclusive, and like that makes me so happy. And like as far as creative projects in Nashville, for the scene I can speak to, it's much more inclusive. And but I don't know, it was a starting point, but like we were saying, first and second wave feminism were like, it kind of carried on with that, but I think they did recognize it, and that's why at the end of the day, like Riot Grrl was like, okay, well, we have to move on to a new thing here. Yeah.
Should we move on to Pussy Whipped, or do you want to talk more about
we can move on.
There's a lot of good ones. I mean, I might say that this is my favorite Bikini Kill record.
Yeah, I think it's a good one. It's a good like cohesive record because it was their first one that wasn't like
it was their first record.
Yeah. So, and considering they didn't put out a ton of music or whatever, I think this is a great record. It's man, it's really good. I really like Magnet.
That was what I was gonna, was the song I was gonna point out. You hold me down like a magnet. I've got the love that's strong and not weak. Again, nonviolence. You don't own me. Fuck you. You don't own me. You hold me down like a magnet. That is,
it's so simple, but it's like, you don't own me. And that's like a revolutionary thing to say I think not only at the time they wrote the song, but for any young woman listening to it. I know when I listened to it and I was 18 or whatever, you don't own me, fuck you, you don't own me. Like, is like, okay, like, no one owns me, not, you know, like, that's like as a woman growing up or whatever you are, kind of like you feel like that. So that's a pretty cool statement. Yeah. And yeah, the nonviolence is a really interesting theme throughout that is, and maybe a lot more songs than I even noticed.
I just think it's an interesting juxtaposition because when she's singing this, she is screaming it, but she's talking about love.
Yeah.
You know?
It is.
Yeah.
But that's like what we talked about, the duality. I mean, I think that is cool because, like, you can still be angry and not be violent, and you can still be angry and feel love for another, you know, for like other women or whatever, and you can still be angry at someone. So it is cool that she's like yelling, but about love. So it's like,
but
get the message.
Yeah, it's like at that time you had to scream it.
Yeah.
There was like, I have to get my fucking message
like
across.
Literally, physically, she had to scream for people to like pay attention to her. And I think that's kind of interesting in like other podcast research I've done. There's kind of been this theme with like when it comes to like figurehead people, it's like they have to become like a character, or they have to become this like a loud person for people to take them seriously. They have to be completely the opposite, you know?
Right.
And I feel like Kathleen Hanna is a good example of that. Like, she had to get on stage with like not a lot of clothes on and like yell and like stage dive and kick men out of her shows, and then they got it. Like, it's like, okay, like you do have to be totally ridiculous for people to take you seriously.
Yeah. And then it was like, this is fucking exhausting, we can't be a band anymore.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly why
it took a toll on them.
It really did take a toll on all of them. It was like they were experiencing like mental health and, you know, whatever issues, because like
they were a political
taking
band.
a burden of being a political band.
And I don't want to discount, like, I know we talk about Kathleen Hanna a lot because she's, you know, kind of the figurehead of the band.
But the other members,
the other members were
just
so
as much work.
Important. They were, as, you know, if not more politically involved in the movement. Billy Cameron is a great guitarist and did some great guitar work on a lot of these songs, especially, you know, as you get into Pussy Whipped and Reject All American.
Yeah, his skill increases as well. You can definitely tell.
Yeah.
Which is cool. And like Kathy Wilcox and Toby Vale contributed to like a bunch of zines and art projects throughout the time, and were also just as like politically active.
Yeah, I mean, Magnet is the song for me.
Magnet's
Pussy Whipped,
definitely my favorite song on there.
Sugar, I think I wrote down something about Sugar too. Oh, well, Star-Bellied Boy and Sugar, I just, to come back to kind of the, you know, sexual undertones of Bikini Kill, talking, I mean, Star-Bellied Boy, there is a line, why do I cry every time I come? And then she repeats the refrain, I can't come. That, y'all,
no one's ever written a song like that. At this point, no one's ever written that in a song.
Female pleasure, female emotion, the intricacies of that. Why do I cry every time I come? I mean, she could be talking about trauma. I mean, it's, that line is
so many experiences like put into one line, for sure.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. I think she really opened a door, like putting that in music, because it really could mean so many things. And it, you know, I mean, they openly talked about like them or their friends or every woman they know having some story of trauma.
Right.
And I think that's true today. I mean, you know, everyone I know has at least some kind of story, and it could be about that, or it could be about like societally, like we don't teach men how to like pleasure women or whatever. So that's like a cool song that she was like, okay, like, yeah, why do I cry every time I go? Like, that's crazy that she put that in a song. That's crazy.
Yeah. And Sugar was the same way. It's like pretty tongue-in-cheek, like, you know, oh baby, I want you, you're so fucking hot, you know, whatever, you're so fucking big, you know, that whole thing. And but the song is about her talking about why this guy won't pleasure her, like why she can't get off. Again, these were young women talking about, I mean, to be able to recognize that. And, I haven't heard Kathleen Hanna talk, I haven't been able to find this, maybe on what influenced her ideologies with feminism. What inspired her to talk about these themes? And I know that one reason for her media blackout was because the media was talking about she was sexually assaulted, trying to pin all of these things on her, and she made a big deal about
she wasn't like she was like emotionally abused and manipulated, but she was not like assaulted or whatever
by her raped by her father, but she knew many women that were. And
I think that was
a collective experience.
Big thing was the collective experience that she talks about in the documentary. Like, she had a roommate who was like assaulted in their own home. So I think a big part of, maybe from what I can tell, because I don't truly know the whole reason behind her specific ideologies, which is interesting to look into and I would like to know, but was maybe that collective experience was like, okay, even if it hasn't happened to me, I know so many women that this has happened to. And I'm sure a lot of it came from like being a 21-year-old woman talking with your friends about like your sexual experiences or your experiences with men, and like having so much similarity, I think. And so I think a lot of it was like, okay, like even if this hasn't happened to me, like it's happened to someone else, and whoever's listening to it can relate to that because it's happened to them or whatever. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. And
I want to emphasize too how big of a deal it was in the when the early 90s happened, when Bikini Kill happened, when Bratmobile happened, when Huggy Bear happened, that girls were playing rock music, girls were playing punk music. We have the Runaways before that, we have the Slits before that, we have X-Ray Specs. We don't have many examples. The Raincoats, we don't have many examples at all. And Bikini Kill, Sleater-Kinney, like the Riot Grrrl movement is one of the reasons why we're starting to see more females in rock music, in indie music, starting bands, fronting bands, being songwriters. Like, this is the timeline, And I feel like we kind of take that for granted a little bit.
For sure, like in the time we're in. Because that's like, you think about it, a lot of people talk about how like when there's a list from some old Rolling Stone magazine or whatever, it never mentions Joni Mitchell in the top 20 songwriters. And the reason a lot of women aren't mentioned in, like, when you talk about historical records, when you're first getting into music as a woman, before you find stuff like this and you're like, okay, the Beatles, the Stones, the whatever happened in the 70s and 80s, because like a lot of women weren't invited to be making music, and they weren't given a place, they weren't given record deals, they weren't taken seriously. So yeah, it is cool that like to see a change like after this, like as society progresses, like to like have these people come in, like take the brunt of it, and have bands like Sleater-Kinney and Bikini Kill doing that. And now it's like, you don't think about it. You go to a show where it's like half women on the bill, and you don't, we probably do take that for granted, but it is cool to think about that. They like definitely, Riot Grrrl like helped like set a precedent for like, here's how music is going to be from here on out, and it's going to have women in it, and you're going to like it or not, because we have stuff to say, and we're going to say it. And like 20 years later, women still have a lot to say, and they're saying it.
Guess what?
Yeah, guess what?
Yeah, can
20
you
years
believe
from
it?
now, they're also going to have a lot to say.
Yeah. I feel like Reject All American is important because I remember hearing that record, and now at this time I'm probably 16, 17, I guess, and I remember I got this record like on vacation with my aunt and uncle that lived in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I had access to record stores and stuff, and so I remember like listening to this cassette on my Walkman, and I was like, who is this band? The production is so much different than all of there are girl gang vocals all over this record. There are guitar solos on the record. One thing that I think is so fun and I'm so glad they did it. Statement of Vindication and Finale is the same song with different lyrics. Yeah. I was just like, you're a fucking rock band now. Yeah. This is amazing, but also I kind of hate it too. Like, how dare you change? Yeah. You know? And that was the thing too about the Riot Grrrl movement and these bands, Bikini Kill, like becoming so possessive of them. And then, you know, in Girls to the Front, Kathleen Hanna's talking about during this time where they were being courted by major labels. And how, you know, no one in Bikini Kill wanted to be on a major label. They felt, it was capitalist. The media was ruining the movement. This is not what they set out to do.
Yeah, because they didn't even have like roadies, tour managers. Right. They were super DIY as a political band, dealing with all of that. On top of that, they had the stress of being
they were broke,
completely DIY, and like no money. Yeah,
anyway. They were broke. They weren't seeing royalties from anything, and how Kathleen, she just wanted to basically like take these labels for a ride and just see what she could get out of them. And they were courted by every single major label you could think of. Could you imagine if Bikini Kill would have signed to Interscope Records, where they would be now?
Yeah,
if
crazy.
If they would have trademarked or copyrighted the term Riot Grrrl.
Yeah.
The fact that they didn't do that because they wanted Riot Grrrl to belong to every woman
is really important.
It's
like
really
can't
important.
Be understated how like important the like open access to these ideals
they sacrificed
they did for sure
in order to make sure that it was accessible and it kept to their mission statement.
Yeah
because it's especially during that time in the 90s, it was so easy to sell out because major labels were coming at bands like Bikini Kill with $1 million deals.
Yeah.
You don't see money like that anymore as an indie band.
And that was like a big, because there wasn't maybe as much of a saturation as like famous indie bands. So yeah, it is cool that like from the start they made those mission statements and like kept to it like 6-7 years later. And it's like,
and they were like, we'll just break up.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're in R.I.P. I just want to say on Reject All American is supposedly about Kurt Cobain.
Yeah. Because he did have a close relationship with him, and that is pretty sad.
I wanted to talk about the tidbit, and this is going off, R.I.P. being about Kurt Cobain, the fact that maybe it's a widely known fact now.
That Smells Like Teen Spirit thing?
Yeah. Well,
it is still cool.
That Toby Vale and Kurt Cobain dated.
Yeah.
And so during this time, Kathleen became, pretty good friends with Kurt Cobain, and she spray painted on his wall in his apartment, Kurt Smells Like Teen Spirit, which is, to me, like, well, of course a woman came up with that. And of course a man ran with it and then became like the biggest band in the world. Yeah. Right?
But that's like their biggest single. And Kathleen Hanna wrote that. She drunkenly spray painted it on his apartment.
Those are Kathleen Hanna words. Yeah. That's her phrase.
That. Yeah.
And Nirvana built an empire off of that. Yeah.
It's kind of classic. It's kind of a classic story.
Classic patriarchy, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's really crazy.
I don't remember reading anything about Kurt Cobain ever giving her,
lyrics or anything, any help. That, yeah.
This was actually my friend Kathleen Hanna's phrase.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. Bikini Kill's music to me was the opposite of escapism. Because, you think about popular music, mainstream music, how, music can be this escape, right?
Yeah.
Pop music. But Bikini Kill was the opposite of that because they were in your face saying, these very important messages, political, sexual, and I think that is a really important aspect of Bikini Kill.
Yeah, I've never thought about it that way. I really like that thought. Yeah, it really is like the opposite of escapism, which I think is why maybe people are like turned away from it or whatever, because I think we all use some music as that to an extent, but a lot of music, is more powerful in that it doesn't give into that, and that's exactly what Bikini Kill did. They were like, this is reality, and this is a reality that we're not even talking about, and we're gonna talk about it, and we're gonna talk about it really loudly.
We're gonna hold up a mirror to society and Did you ever see the new Alternative Girls film that Tamara Davis, Mike D from the Beastie Boys, his wife, made?
That's cool.
Yeah, and I remember seeing this when, you know, I was pretty young, and Kathleen is on there, but she's wearing a ski mask. And I didn't know until I saw the Punk Singer documentary that she wore the ski mask because of the media blackout.
Okay.
She said, I'll be in this film.
But you can't.
And this film was like MTV played it. It was, they did that. There's a compilation called New Alternative. Smashing Pumpkins were on it. There was a lot of singles that came out of that compilation. But, yeah, Kathleen Hanna was on it, and I remember hearing her talk. I forget, I meant to watch it and remember what she was talking about, but she was wearing a ski mask, and I was just like, what a badass. What a badass. That's really cool. And then also Kathleen Hanna being in the Bull and the Heather video for Sonic Youth.
Oh, yeah.
I think was also a really big deal because that was a huge single for Sonic Youth.
Yeah. And
it was like, who is this like cute girl in pigtails bouncing around? And you know, do your research however you did in the 90s. It's Kathleen Hanna from Bikini Kill. And I remember freaking out. I was like, that's Kathleen Hanna from Bikini Kill. She's in Sonic Youth video. Worlds are colliding.
Well, that is the kind of basics, a little bit more than the basics about Bikini Kill, and hopefully it piqued your interest in Riot Grrl in general and music beyond that. Thank you for being on the show, Beth.
Thank you, Olivia. This was wonderful.
Yeah, and thank you guys for listening.